will follow in the coming months, probably during November, December, or maybe at the early start of 2021. And we will be covering various sets of blockchain aspects, from more technical dimensions such as P2P databases or dApps, to more business-oriented aspects, or maybe political and philosophical aspects such as digital identities and distributed autonomous organizations. Overall, we have 8 modules to present. So today's presentation will be focusing on 2. Of course, this is, as I said, a glimpse of the overall discussions and the series of events what we're going to be hosting in the coming months. And the focus of today's event is the smart contract aspect and the privacy and IPR on the blockchain, as I said earlier. And tomorrow's session will be focused on more practical aspects of these dimensions, and I hope to be engaging a market overview of the whole blockchain trend. Before giving the floor to Dimitris, I have to kindly ask you to fill out online questionnaire, which I will post in a minute in the group chat. And of course, you are very welcome to join our website for any comments or discussions. So, Dimitris, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you guys can hear me. Let me set up the first presentation. I will be presenting for the next 1 hour and 30 minutes. We will begin with, if this can work with me. There we go. We will begin with a short introduction to smart contracts. This class will last 45 minutes. There will be time for questions at the end of this. And after that, a small break for 10 minutes. And then I will continue with my second presentation on the introduction of Ethereum smart contracts at the end of that first hour. So I will be presenting for a total of 1 hour, 30 minutes. I will ask you to hold off your questions until the end of my presentation, or maybe at the end of the full course, just so we can answer everything together. And this is the first part, class C1, which is the introduction to smart contracts. This, of course, assumes you have a very basic understanding of what a blockchain actually is, but I'm sure we can work through it even if you don't. Well, the duration of this class is 45 minutes.
I think we lost Dimitris. So maybe we can...
Yeah, just a minute so we can get back to Dimitris.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute hold. Dimitris, are you there? We have a power issue with Dimitris Founis, so we're trying to get it back. Dimitris Bibikas, can we start with?
Yeah, maybe it's wiser to start with Irakli. Irakli, are you there?
Yes, hold on a second. Yes.
So probably it's a good idea to start with.
We are going to start, yes.
And then wait for Dimitris to join us and switch
the presentations. Yeah, thank you and sorry for waiting.
Okay. Let me. Can you see the screen?
Yes, everything looks great.
Okay. So, okay, I'll try and step in for Dimitris for the first hour. I will talk to you about blockchain and from the perspective of privacy and property. Now, this is where we're trying to combine these three different worlds. The world of privacy, which is quite controversial and quite, I would say, important in the sense that it really defines this new era. At the same time, by property, we're talking about IPR, intellectual property rights, not any kind of property. And this is where blockchain really can assist in fast-tracking a number of transactions. With privacy, we have both opportunities and challenges, as we'll see later on. So we'll talk about what is privacy. Then we will try and see a few things about intellectual property. And then we will talk about blockchain challenges and opportunities in the above areas. Okay. So the world of privacy, as I said, is very controversial. At the same time, is extremely important and extremely really intricate in the sense that we have effectively two worlds. The world of, let me enable my video, and hopefully it won't crash like Dimitris. So what we have really is we have two worlds, the Europe and we have EU. We're not talking about Russia and China because it's a different, completely different kettle of fish. They're both, China and Russia are not in what one may call is a typical Western societies, for better or for worse. I'm not making any judgment. I'm just trying to state facts. They're different so far. But on the Western world, we have two big camps. One is Europe and the other is USA. Europe has decided, for better or for worse, for better in my opinion, personal opinion that is, to regulate the whole data world, the exploitation of data, which is the fuel of tomorrow's economy. At the moment, we're going through the fourth industrial revolution, and the whole this revolution is based on data, and we will be based on data, and will really require data in order to be able to function properly and to yield the expectations that are anticipated. So all the way back in 1995, the EU passed what was called in those days a directive. And I mean that because I will explain to you in a millisecond what is the difference between a directive and a regulation. But they passed a directive which the countries of the European Union had to adapt into their local legislation. And by directive means that they take this body of legislation and they adapt it. Therefore, In 1997, Greece adopted this. In 1998, was adopted by UK, and so forth, and all the other countries. Now, this is different to the GDPR regulation, which is currently is in force. And this was enacted as an act of European Parliament all the way back in 2016, but was given 2 years for the various countries to adopt this as part of the now. The regulation is something that you take it as it is and you do not adapt it. The reason being is because what the European Union saw, the Commission saw, was that the directive was then interpreted in certain countries in different ways. So, for example, in Greece, it was interpreted that even the handheld records were protected by the Data Protection Act. And this caused immense problems in Greece. Specifically, you may recall the case with the Greek IDs, where the religion had to be, in the old version, the police IDs, they had to state the religion of the bearer, and therefore the Data Protection Act required that all this data was very personal and therefore should not be exposed in daylight in the way that it was. And it was nothing to do with the identification of the individual, whether this person was Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever. In order to avoid all these issues that caused immense problems, that's why the EU now decided to do a regulation. But again, even within that, they still allowed, as we'll see later on, still some room to maneuver. Now, this was not the first attempt in Europe, and the first attempt was in UK all the way back in 1965, thus this demonstrates how quickly people saw the need for data to be regulated, and also they realized that the machines have the ability to process data extremely fast, extremely quickly, and they can have, they can store huge amounts of data, which they can revisit, and they can repurpose, and can reinterpret, and can reprocess as they wish, and from different perspectives. This is extremely important, although UK, the IT world asked for an equivalent of data protection all the way back in 1965. They were given one in 1984. And thus, this demonstrates how reluctant the state was to regulate the use of data. Therefore, data, as I said, is really very controversial. It's a trade war between America and Europe for this very point, in the sense that even with the Data Protection Act of 1995, it forced American companies that were operating in Europe to set up a totally different operation regarding how they processed personal data of their customers, and how they marketed stuff, and how they collected data, and how they processed it. And that had to be different from their other operations, primarily in America, but also from the rest of the world. Therefore, they couldn't run campaigns that shared, they had the same format, the same process. That could no longer be the case, because they had to observe the Data Protection Act. These different perspectives, of course, it really reflects two different philosophies, two different ways of viewing the same need. And the basic needs is really the following: that for this fourth revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution to occur, data is of paramount importance. Therefore, you must have data. The point is whether you will allow this data to be collected as the person who collects the data decides, where the the person upon whom the data is, who provides the data has no saying as to what exactly is done, what exactly processing is happening, what sort of deductions are made and so forth, or whether you will provide a framework which tries to regulate this, but at the same time not be prohibitive to the collection of data and to the processing of data by the company. So trying to find a balance, at least this is what the Commission is claiming, that trying to find a balance between the need for the data, where everybody benefits, the customer benefits, the business benefits as well, but at the same time, we have a point of reference in order which not only regulates how this process is happening, but also in case we have any kind of issues, there is a point of reference to redress, and also there's a point of reference where both businesses and individuals can really run into and seek help. Okay, now USA on the other hand is taking a completely different view. It believes very much on the freedom of the individual, and therefore they say that if the individual believes that the companies, this person is willing to provide the companies with the opportunity to collect and select data as and if and when they wish, so be it. Therefore, they will not really object, because the individual, as in any case here, whenever you allow the companies to collect data, you agree in advance with them, and as a result, really, there's nothing. There's nothing hidden. There is nothing that is illegal. Nevertheless, we have other cases. For example, CCTV. For example, when you use your credit card, where data is collected for one purpose, but may be used for a different purpose. Okay, and let me give you very quickly the example of the supermarket, which is very typical. We all go to the supermarket and we're very happy to share our shopping habits with a supermarket chain, okay, where therefore we receive vouchers which are specific to the products that we purchase, and therefore we enjoy reductions on prices and offers and so forth. But it is not known to a wide audience of the population that at the same time, through your eating habits, you are revealing your health status. So therefore, if you are consuming a lot of beers, then, for example, you are revealing to an insurance company, which may be a subsidiary of the supermarket, and therefore they can share the data immediately without any further consent of yours, which therefore can estimate your time of death because you are becoming alcoholic, and therefore you're damaging your liver because of the alcohol consumption and so forth. The same goes if you choose and consume very fatty foods, or if you consume some low quality products which contain low quality products within themselves, like offcuts of meat. Therefore, they contain a lot of fat, and therefore they can estimate your when you will have a heart attack, because your arteries will be clogged with fat very quickly. So all this data that you have never consented to, nevertheless, is been gathered, is been accumulated, and is been processed. And this is something that people are using quite a lot. And this is really old stuff. This is happening since the 80s. Now things have really moved far, far forward, where really because of face recognition, there is a possibility of performing a number of things, but I will go this into more detail later on. So really, collecting data is not a very simple, straightforward. It's not a matter of consenting. It's a matter of not consenting and exactly to what you have consented to. Okay. Oops. Okay. So to be able to understand really how the whole world and this whole regulation is operating, as I said, at the moment, we're having in Europe the General Data Protection Regulation, or what is known as GDPR. However, GDPR is arranged in 110 articles, and therefore this is almost impossible for me to convey you what is the basic fundamental principles behind it. And to that extent, I will fall back into the 1998 Data Protection Act, which really is very neatly organized in 8 principles, and therefore it is much easier, much quicker, and for me and for you to grasp a very good understanding of how the privacy is defined in Europe, and therefore see opportunities and challenges that are posed to blockchain. Very quickly, before we move, I just want to mention that, as you know, blockchain is really of interest to us, especially from the perspective of privacy and IPR, on its ability or on its immutability property. This is really what is of interest to us, and this is what makes it extremely attractive. It means that we have the ability to ensure that certain transactions has occurred and nobody can dispute that, or a transaction that has occurred under certain conditions. If these conditions are not satisfied, then this transaction, if it occurs, then we can raise an alarm, or it does not happen at all altogether. Okay, so this is really what we're interested in. Okay, so let me now, of course, GDPR, as I said, is a refinement of data protection, and this is extremely important to understand because really is based on the experience of 15 years and a little bit more of application of data protection in the whole European Union, and through the data protection authorities and through the courts who decided certain issues at certain points. They really refined and made things more specific and more explicit, and therefore they closed what one may call loopholes, i.e. Points where they could be interpreted in one way or another. So for example, in Data Protection Act, only companies who operated within the EU states, only they had to operate under observing the Data Protection Act. So for example, if you were using eBay.com, i.e. the USA version of eBay, then your data was not protected by the Data Protection Act. Okay, because you are dealing with a company that is based in USA. Of course, the EU did not want that. They meant that always want to protect its EU citizens, and therefore they changed in GDPR the focus, and the focus now in GDPR is that all the EU citizens who deal with any kind of companies, and vice versa, if a company wants to deal with an EU citizen, they have to observe the GDPR. So by really changing the focus and making sure that, you know, phrasing the article in a rather slightly different way, they now close this loophole. And therefore, companies who offer services and who collect data on any EU citizen, they must observe for that EU citizen the GDPR protection. You may say that this is unfair. You may say, of course, that this is, what if, I have one citizen and so forth. But for better or for worse, now it is far, far more clear, and it's far more protective in terms of its citizens, because the rationale was always to offer protection in its citizenship, okay, i.e. the EU citizens. So therefore, here we have an opportunity for blockchain where it alarms or alerts people if they go to any non-EU based companies that therefore that company is then alerted that they have to observe EU regulation, in this particular case GDPR, and thus would allow or not allow this customer, depending on the decision of the company, of course, to allow them to enter and do any kind of activities on that web page. This is of extreme importance. Of course, you can always fool the system by using VPN, but that is really beyond the spirit of the law, because the idea is to protect people who whose origin of IPs is from the EU. Okay. So let us now try to understand a little bit the phrasing of the regulation and the Data Protection Act and the directive as it was then phrased. The fundamental objective was to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of natural persons. I'd just like to draw your attention to the term natural persons, in particular the right to privacy with respect to the processing of personal data. Now, why is it natural persons? First of all, because as you see, it has two terms, natural and persons. Therefore, person, as you may know, in legal terms, everybody is a person. A company is a person. The difference between a company and a human being is that the company is a legal person, whereas the human being is a natural person. Therefore, all this protective regulation only applies to living natural persons. It does not apply to dead people. Dead people are no longer protected. They can have their data scrutinized wherever they are, etc., etc., etc. So only living human beings have their data protected. The rationale is very simple, because we don't want to the companies to use this regulation in order to hide away a number of their activities depending on the status of the company. For example, if they're a publicly limited company, then they are supposed to publish their accounts so that the shareholders can see how the company is performing and so forth, and some other data as well. Okay, so they cannot hide behind this regulation, this legislation, in order to not to reveal what they consider to be secrets for them or private issues. Okay, now the regulation, to operate this, we have the very pivotal role of what is known as the Data Protection Authority. This as an authority, and specifically it all falls down to an individual who is heading the Data Protection Authority. Is called the Data Protection Commissioner, or Data Protection Registrar, or the Commissioner, or however you want to call it. Different states have called them different names, who is really the pivotal person in applying this regulation. What is this person doing? Is first of all, he's creating a list where all companies or individuals who want to hold information and data about natural persons, they have to register, so that you know, so that you as an individual can then go and look through the register and find out who is collecting information in that particular country, because the data protection commissioners are one per country of the EU. So in this particular case, now officially we're 27. Hopefully, if the UK agrees and makes an agreement with the European Union, they will retain also Data Protection Act, the GDPR. And it's a shame because UK is the best example that we have when it comes to implementation and interpreting the spirit of data protection in general. So it will be a shame if there's no agreement, and therefore if UK decides to completely replace this by an act of their own, which is different from the European Union. So therefore, what is known as data controller, as we'll see later on, has to register there, and they have to provide what kind of data they will collect, for how long, what is the purpose, who is the recipient of this data, and if they send it outside the EU. Okay, and for how long they're going to have this data. So once this is happening, then the Data Protection Commissioner is there, to assist the data controllers in interpreting and applying the law correctly. Therefore, both the GDPR and data protection, initially, they have no punitive character, but rather they have an advising character. They're there to ensure that the law is understood correctly and implemented correctly. It's only if the data controller refuses to obey and observe what is seen here as a serving notice, that means you have done something wrong, and therefore what you have done wrong is raised to you through a notice that is being served upon you. Then only if you breach that notice, then you will go to a court and you will face criminal charges. Okay. Also, if the data controller, for whatever reason, is really not replying to any data subject's request for access and provision of their records regarding what sort of data and what processing and what results and to whom they have shared these results and so forth, a request from the data subject is not satisfied, and the data subjects are in desperation, the individual person, then they can go to the Data Protection Commissioner and request their help in order to be assisted. Here I have for you the sites of the Greek Data Protection Authority and the Information Commissioner, as it is known in UK, where you can see examples, but also you can see all the cases that have been studied so far and have been processed by both authorities, that is in the UK and in Greece. The term that we need to become familiar in order to be able to understand is data, data controller, which I already mentioned, data processor, and data subject. Okay. Now, another thing that really, before I continue and explain these things in detail, one other reason why the EU is very much in favor of establishing a playing field where it has some rules. You may disagree with the rules. You may think that it is really too restrictive for the companies, or you may argue that it's really too liberal for the protection of the individuals. But nevertheless, there are some rules which they, as the transition from data protection to GDPR has shown, there is an improvement. So one can always build and better things as time passes by. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that data, as I said earlier, is being collected, and whereas in the past, surveillance, and when I'm talking surveillance, I'm now referring to physical surveillance. It was happening because the state or individuals were spying on certain individuals. But in both cases, whether it was a state or individual through a private detective, they had to organize this. Therefore, they had to put resources, and therefore they had to physically follow that individual or those individuals and so forth in order to collect data. And of course, they had to observe certain rules and laws and not to break laws. So for example, if they wanted to tap on telecommunications, they had to ask for a permission, an injunction, that is, a law order. Sorry, in order to achieve that and so forth. Now, these days, with all the electronics that we are surrounded, as I said earlier, is CCTV cameras, the use that we do on our credit cards, which reveals a number of things for us, although only what we do is there, we settle an account, and really we never meant that the contents of this transaction ought to be processed, but nevertheless they are processed. And the credit card companies are selling that information to a number of individuals. Okay, when I say individuals, I mean individual companies. Okay, and also, as you all know, and I will use the famous expression of Richard Stallman. Richard Stallman, for those who don't know, is the guy who founded GNU and behind the spread of Linux. And once he gave a talk here in Salonika. He raised his mobile, said, I don't have one, because this is a walking tracking device. You all know the property of GPRS, which means that the mobile phone is always sending signal because it needs to register with a mast. And therefore, that is why when it goes outside the range of the mast that is currently being registered, then the phone goes crazy and starts sending as much as possible the radio waves, and they increase, which they say that they cook our brain, but that's another matter altogether, in order to to connect with the mast that is closer to the case, to the point where we're heading at. So the mobile operators always know, because we have a unique IMA, as you know, which now we use it in order to shut down our phones when they are stolen. Now, that same property enables the mobile operators to know exactly, when I say exactly, within a 300 radius of a mast where we are. Okay, and if we are registering in more than one mast, then through triangulation, they'll be able to pinpoint us much quicker. But not only that, the various apps that we download on our smartphones today, they collect immense amount of data, which we are not really always aware of. The worst offender, of course, is Google. All those who have used Google Meet, try this small experimentation, open it up and close the microphone and start chatting. Immediately, you will see a message pop up which says, it seems that you're chatting, but your microphone is switched off. Please switch on your microphone in order to be transmitting. And the same goes with Zoom, of course, yes? So it means that although we have physically shut down a device, nevertheless, that device is still receiving and processing that data. Now, where exactly that data is going, nobody knows. Okay, so really, data is collected automatically, and this is the huge difference between all-time surveillance and what is known today as data surveillance. Okay, that we are offering our data, which is processed automatically at extreme high speeds. Okay, so what is data? Data means information which is being processed by means of equipment operating automatically. It is recorded with the intent that this will be processed. It is recorded as part of a relevant filing system, force a record of the health or education, etc., etc. Okay, so really anything that is structured either by a reference to individuals or by a reference to certain criteria. So, for example, who buys crisps, who buys chocolates, who buys this kind of milk or that kind of milk, any kind of categorization that constitutes processing of data. Therefore, this list is not really exhaustive, but is there because we don't know exactly, we cannot really determine in a prescriptive manner all the processing that can happen to data, because things, as we evolve. Things are happening that some time ago were not possible. So here we have 3 potential examples of data, which is a library catalog on Microfiche. Microfiche is an old version of enlarged film, the same material as that of an ordinary film in the old days, with an ordinary camera, which nevertheless it contains a compacted huge amounts of information that is handwritten stuff, which you use a special machine which magnifies the content, and therefore you are able to really pack, I don't know, 100 pages in one microfiche. So is that personal data? The answer is no, because it really contains information about books who are in the library. And yes, they contain personal data as the names of the authors, but in this particular case, they have opted to make this available in the public, and thus really, because the information has been made available by the individual, it therefore does not constitute, does not warrant any kind of protection. So anything that we provide for out in the public, automatically we cannot claim retrospectively data protection. So for example, if we use Facebook, which is I think or if we use Twitter or Instagram, any picture that we post out there automatically is public property. It becomes part of everybody, and therefore whatever any inferences that can be made out of this picture, they're there for free to anybody who can interpret that picture. And that is, for example, a classic case where we post a picture with some friends and we have the bad habit of tagging. Therefore, even if somebody is not having a Twitter account, or does not have a Facebook account, or doesn't have any social media account, nevertheless, they can be found, their name and their picture that is, their face being recognized on the net because of the picture that was posted by a friend and this person being tagged. Okay. And as I'm sure you all know, once something is on the internet, that is on a public domain or any kind of domain on the web, then that information is never, ever, ever removed. You may delete your account, you may, but the actual source of data is always being saved by the person who ran that service that you're using before. Okay, so always, whenever you post something, be aware that it remains there. Okay, so an account number on a check, yes, it is personal data, but it's not sufficient to identify you unless you are the bank and you have the ability to really check this account number within the bank and therefore identify the person who is associated with that number, with that account. Whereas the last one is a classic case of personal data that is an employee record that's stored on a card index system. It doesn't matter that is on a card index system in this particular case. It's just there to indicate that even manual, as I said, Greece had opted for the case where all record systems, be manual or electronic, would be afforded data protection. Okay, so this is an extremely important point, and I will give you one hint that today the human resources departments are actively and furiously instructing their managers to be very careful when they appraise staff what to put there, because they have to justify that the person has the right to ask for a copy of their record. And therefore, if the managers wrote down, this person is lazy, or this person is a lost case, or this, something that the employee thinks it's a derogative comment, then the employer has to justify this, how they came to this conclusion. And therefore, if they're not justified, then they are really having false information, and therefore this contravenes the right of the subject, as we'll see later on. So one has to be very, very careful as what is stored today. So data controller is the individual or the company who is really collecting information on data subjects. Okay, so this is the person who will determine what kind of data, for how long, how it's going to be processed, what sort of process operations we're going to apply on this data, and to whom we are going to reveal the results of all this processing that has occurred on the data. Data controller is responsible for organizing the whole safety of both physical but also electronically of how data is being stored, and who has access to this data, and who processes that data. And I say who processes that data because we will see later in a few seconds, we will see the case to our next person, who is a data processor, who is mostly in many cases. For example, the supermarkets are not processing the data themselves, nor are they collecting this. Normally, this is happening by the IT company who is supplying them with the various software that they use. And they are the data processor, normally. In Data Protection Act, the data processor was tightly coupled with the data controller in the sense that they had to have a contract between the controller and the processor, where the controller had to state in the contract explicitly what the processor could and could not do according to the Data Protection Act. And therefore, it is for this reason, and also because companies sometimes they create subsidiary companies in order to avoid liability, because they can say always, I didn't do it, this company done it, they are a completely independent company for us, really is nothing to do with us, therefore you go and sue them. So in order to avoid this, the Data Protection Act directive, they had already said that whatever stupidity the processor does, the controller will pay for it. Therefore, will be held responsible as well. GDPR has moved one step further because when they went to courts, a number of cases, the processor said, oh, well, they will end up with contracts which were incomplete, were not easy to understand, and therefore the processors were escaping sometimes with crimes based on a very badly written contracts between the processor and the controller, and the processor claimed ignorance of the data protection directive. And therefore, in GDPR, both of them are instructed to register with the Data Protection Commissioner. Though, therefore, each one with their role, i.e. processor and controller, and therefore now the processor can no longer claim ignorance of this. Okay, so really this is extremely important case. And this is another subject is the individual who is actually providing the data that has been collected by the controller and or the processor and has been processed by the processor primarily. Okay, now as I said here before, we refer to the individual rather than a person, because the person is a legal term and person without the adjective that is natural or legal, we don't know to where exactly we're making reference to. Okay, now this personal data, it cannot be anything, but really, as I said, is something that identifies the individual. As long as it identifies the individual, then that is personal data, and it has to be treated with respect. In the early days of data protection directive, the designers of web pages were being naughty, probably at the order of the persons who actually wanted to collect personal data, where they were asking for people to actively exclude themselves. I.e., if the default was that the web page will install a cookie and they will collect any kind of data they wish, and that was a default value, unless you saw this very small print version that you wanted not to happen, this to happen. This halfway it changed, and therefore there had to be a positive, an affirmative activity, i.e., I agree that I want to provide you with data, not I disagree, but I agree. And even now, as you all know, we have moved one way further, because the cookies have proved very controversial as to exactly what sort of data they are collecting, on whose behalf they are collecting that data, who is sharing automatically or non-automatically. So, for example, Facebook provides some kind of apps and functionalities which are useful for for various web pages, and therefore, but when they provide you with that data, also they also collecting that data. The same goes for Google Analytics. Google also collects that data that you are collecting. Therefore, that is why now we see a classification, although this is nothing to do with data protection. It's the digital privacy, which is another legislation that one can study, the e-privacy legislation that's being promoted again by the Commission. Okay, but nevertheless, it is really extremely important that we are aware of what is happening and to whom we are really providing data. So the data controls and data processors, they must provide, as I said earlier, a description of the personal data, the details of the purposes, to whom they will send it, if it goes outside the EU, and so forth. Now, the cloud, where a number of customers use in order to fuel their web pages, is really providing a headache, at least at the very beginning, but I think now it's being sorted to a certain extent, although this is not 100% sure, because although we can ensure that the particular servers are used from farms within the EU, it is not 100% sure that the same is happening with backups. We know, for example, from Google, anecdotal evidence says that it may take even up to 2 years for Google to delete everything, because it's extremely costly. They will allow the periodical overriding of data to override some of your data eventually. Therefore, that data potentially exists somewhere on a server, and we don't know exactly what is the process, or if an emergency occurs. So, for example, if the servers in Germany are supposed to be backed up by in the servers, let's say, in Holland, but for some reason Holland suffers a power cut, then maybe the server, it is proved that it is provided somewhere. There's a rule which says, okay, in that case, let's back up this in Greenland. Greenland, although it is part of Denmark, formally is not part of the EU. So, for example, and whilst, as you know, the Arctic places is a very common place of where data centers are being built in order to reduce the cost for that is generated by the heat to cool down the servers. What sort of legal issues and legal status exists there is something that we're not aware of. Now, I don't know whether I should continue or whether I should stop here, as I have covered more or less 45 minutes, as Dimitris had said originally. Dimitri? Dimitris Bibikas?
Yes,
Dimitri, can you
go
hear
ahead
us?
with,
Yes.
we can go ahead with the rest of the session, or maybe take a few questions.
Okay, yes.
From the audience, and then move to the second one.
If there are any questions, please answer in the chat or maybe speak.
Shouldn't we keep all the questions until the end, guys?
We could do that as well.
We can do both if there are any questions now, or we can continue with you, Dimitris, and if anyone remembers something about privacy as well, they can put it in the chat and talk about it at the end. So you can begin if you want. Okay,
let me stop then sharing so that Dimitris can take over.
Sure.
Dimitris Founis, that is.
Yeah, there's a lot of Dimitris. Right, guys, I apologize for this. The Greek electricity company did not want me to continue with the presentation. I'm now at my home. Hope everything is all right now. Let me close the window just for one moment.
That's why you must buy a lot of hamsters to generate electricity, Dimitri.
I cannot understand what happened. It's just the power was cut. So.
Well, they knew that you were going to talk, and they wanted, because you hadn't paid them enough. That's why they cut it off.
And that's the funny thing. 10 minutes after I start the presentation, the power just cuts out. Anyway.
Don't worry.
Well, for extra questions to Mr. Iraklis, please continue to write them in the chat if you have them, or maybe at the end we'll have enough time to answer everything. Let me start sharing the screen again, just how you saw last time. And here we should go. Again, as I said earlier, before I was cut out, we begin with an introduction to smart contracts, and then we'll move on to an introduction of actual Ethereum smart contracts. We will specialize into an introduction for Ethereum contracts. Let me try this one.
Dimitris, are we okay?
Yeah, I'm just trying to set up my.
All right. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear well.
It will be fine.
Yes, of course.
Right. If you will allow me 2 minutes to restart the computer, maybe it's through the hibernation when I drove home. Maybe it's due to that. Give me 2 minutes to restart the computer, and we'll be fine.
Mr. Iraklis, can I grab the chance to ask a question, if I may? I can hear you. Can you please open microphone?
Yes, yes, of course, please.
Great. One question that I have is,
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, of course, I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me as well?
Yeah,
Good.
totally. Okay. The question that I have is, if we can make a prediction, or at least if we can discuss on when and probably how the European Union will establish an holistic, or at least if we can say a complete framework regarding privacy onto digital currencies, or in general in decentralized systems. If we can have a discussion about it and a brief time framework, like
Okay.
1 year or...
At the moment, there is no such movement, to the best of my knowledge, regarding digital currencies. There's no official position on regulation or anything. On the contrary, the European Central Bank has been reported that they are trying to now issue their own cryptocurrency, whatever that means. And however, as you know, with states, everything can happen by surprise. Anything can happen by surprise. So, for example, one day, you may wake up and they find that, for example, they deem all the transactions that happens in digital currencies are illegal, or so forth. In exactly the same way that, in my opinion, they trouble today all individuals who go to the bank and they want to deposit an amount of cash which is above a threshold. I remember many years back, I was going into the bank with 800 euros, and I want to pay my wife's American Express card, and I was grilled like there was no tomorrow because I was providing cash and I was paying somebody else's credit card. And they said that apparently that was the legislation for against laundering money and mafia and all that stuff. So I'm afraid, A, I don't know. B, to the best, I say I don't know in the sense that to the best of my knowledge, there is no, at the moment, any kind of movement or thoughts, unless you know differently, of course, yourself, that the EU is trying to regulate or is thinking to regulate. Now, in any case, the transactions that occur through all these people are recorded, and they can be processed if and when required. In the same way that every transaction that you make through the bank, as you know, is recorded and is being observed through the use of legislation. So, for example, as you may know, Greece passed a law, I think last month, where it provided the opportunity to the Greek revenue to go and search every individual's account that they think may be a tax evading person for the past 10 years. So they can scrutinize all the accounts that this person or this company may have had in the banks and see what sort of transactions have occurred there. This is something that, in my opinion, is an abuse of power. This is my personal opinion. We know that the Constitution really does not allow any kind of detrimental legislation to occur on us. In any case, what goes back for individuals or companies is 5 years. That is the Inland Revenue can go back and really search for and investigate. So why they have, but then I'm trying to say that, with the state, you can never be certain what exactly they are going to decide. And only if somebody challenges them to the Constitutional Court, only then you may have some kind of redress. But otherwise, it is impossible. Now, to come back to the cryptocurrency processes, as you all know, these are all done through blockchain applications, which means that they are recorded and nobody can dispute the occurrence of these transactions. Therefore, if you are subject to illegal, that you are transacting money for illegal purposes, that is trafficking, money laundering, prostitution, all these activities that are very, very, what's the word, trendy in these days, then they could all get an injunction from the court and could investigate, and the companies that enable this transaction to happen, they will have to hand over the records. I don't know if I have answered your question or not.
Yes, in many parts, I think. I have some notes. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Right. So I see you took the opportunity of a small break to answer some questions, which is great. At least I wasn't going for that long. So let me begin sharing, and we'll begin the class. I don't want to share my screen on top of you, Iraklis. That's why I didn't start. Sorry for that. Here's hoping that everyone can see what
Yes, yes, Dimitris, the presentation is great.
Right, so we'll begin this presentation, this introduction to smart contracts. The class we're going to be passing now aims to provide a basic definition of what a smart contract actually is. I'm sure every single one of you have heard a different definition of what a smart contract is. It is a very catchy term. This class will also describe where smart contracts are actually executed. We will provide the basic definition of what a virtual machine is. These two concepts usually go hand in hand. We will attempt to familiarize students on how to view a smart contract's internal code, just how in real life you would read the clauses of a contract, of a traditional contract. It is also very important to know the process of actually reading the code of a smart contract to see what you're using. We will also explain common terminology used within the context of smart contracts on top of blockchains, and of course showcase some good practices when developing smart contracts. Well, we will begin by saying that even the creator of smart contracts, Vitalik Buterin, even he dislikes the term smart contract. He doesn't like it. It is also a very usual opinion that the term smart contracts refers to something else. So what are smart contracts? Well, formally defined, a smart contract is a self-contained set of rules that lives on top of the blockchain, and it is built to control a mutual exchange of assets. You might have heard it being defined as an autonomous daemon, or a persistent script, or an automatic enforcer, a trustless enforcer. No. What a smart contract is a bunch of code, a script programmed by a human and then embedded on top of the blockchain. And it is built in such a way as to only obey its own internal rules. And of course, automatically executes the terms of the contract clauses of a transaction this time, because a blockchain is a transaction system, when some predefined conditions are met. If something happens, then something else happens. Without, of course, this execution requiring a trusted third party. How does a smart contract actually work? Well, I would like to present an example here. And of course, we're going to be working through this, this scheme step by step. Say that Alice wants to buy an apartment from Bob, and which means that within the context of this transaction of an apartment, Alice holds the money, the price of the apartment. Bob holds the digital certification of ownership for the apartment, and those two want to exchange the asset through a smart contract. Well, the first step in the life cycle of a smart contract is that Alice and Bob sit down and write a smart contract according to each party's needs and conditions. In the case of our sale of an apartment, Alice's condition is that she wants to have the apartment as soon as the money has left her hands, and Bob wants to have the money as soon as the digital ownership of the apartment leaves his hands. So after they write the smart contract together, or to individually assess each other's needs, the smart contract is then empty, deployed on the blockchain by itself. On step 3, the execution, the smart contract, of course, after being deployed, lives autonomously now on the blockchain. And on the third step, it is actually used. So Alice and Bob individually, they send their asset to the smart contract. So Alice sends the money, and Bob sends the digital ownership certification to the smart contract, not to each other. On the fourth step, the smart contract actually checks its internal conditions and actually performs the exchange. So when the smart contract itself holds both the money and the exchange, it does the swap. So its clauses have been met. There's a big thing on ownership of a smart contract, on using the last figure as inspiration. So who owns a smart contract? When we answer who owns a smart contract, we also need to answer the question of why use a smart contract. Well, smart contracts do not belong to anyone, not even the programmer who built them, not even the guy that actually wrote them. They belong to the network, to the peers. After they are deployed, they belong to the community of the blockchain. This autonomy and decentralization that is achieved through the lack of individual ownership of a smart contract enables them to be trustless. Smart contracts are trustless. They are able to operate without requiring trust. And thus, they require no trusted third parties or middlemen to validate the deal. Of course, no trust required between Alice and Bob in the exchange of the apartment, or towards anyone else on the network for that matter, means that a smart contract will deterministically execute its clauses. And this is pretty important to understand. What do we mean by deterministically? Well, the programmatically educated among you will, of course, know the term, but a deterministic machine, like a smart contract, a deterministic smart contract, will always do what it was programmed to do when its conditions are met, rain or shine. There's no external factors being taken into consideration as long as the blockchain itself lives, and therefore the smart contract, which is on the blockchain, also lives. It's going to execute itself in the same written way. This is what we call what we mean by determinism. And it's fine and dandy talking about what it will do once it gets executed, but where is a smart contract actually executed if it belongs to no one, if it belongs to the network? Well, a smart contract belongs to the blockchain, of course, and is also executed on it, but in a shared and distributed way. In what we call the network's virtual machine, a virtual machine because it runs virtual small machines, smart contracts, automatons. Smart contract transactions, excuse me, are executed and checked on what we say multiple nodes, which nodes are the different computers participating on the blockchain networks. Miners or even your computer, your wallet running is a node. And of course, after it runs on multiple different nodes, the results of this execution, what we call the output, all different outputs have to match with each other, with the results of other executions on other nodes. And this is part of the blockchain's consensus reaching mechanism. So the smart contract is executed on different machines, on multiple different machines, and then the results are cross-referenced with each other, correlated with each other, and are only valid if they agree with each other between multiple users. Although this might be a bit wasteful to you, this is a measure that ensures safety and redundancy because no single actor is ever fully responsible for the execution of a smart contract. It's always shared, and therefore eliminating the possibility of fraud in execution. Is this, of course, a fail-safe? Does it completely move out the opportunity for fraud? Well, yes, but actually no, as we say. Smart contracts, much like any other distributed system in computer science, eliminate some problems while introducing us to wholly new ones. In our case, smart contracts can and will be executed by multiple actors on the network, as we said, deterministically. So there's no possibility of this scenario happening. I'm not giving you the money after having received something. This is not able to happen. But smart contracts do open us up to different malicious approaches and security risks. We will discuss those in depth as we go. Remember, every digital system has its pros and has its cons. Of course, now we need to, after we write the smart contract, we need to talk about actually translating a smart contract into code that the blockchain understands. I will pass through this quite quickly because it does get a little bit too technical. But a smart contract language is high level in order to be human readable, much like any programming language. A blockchain, of course, is a distributed system that doesn't really care for human readability and needs to maintain simple, fast semantics in its operations. As it runs on multiple machines, it needs a certain level of homogeneity. So as a result, it only understands machine code. The blockchain only understands machine code. If a smart contract is supposed to remain public, and this is why we're saying all this, if a smart contract is to remain public, it is important that it remains transparent and is readable from any point, any node of the network. So we need to avoid being obfuscated or too heterogeneous. So a basic step in every smart contract's lifecycle is its translation from human readable code, the language that we actually wrote it in, and we translate it into opcodes, machine instructions that the blockchain itself understands. This ensures that every smart contract goes through a flattening step, a sort of filtration that translates the developer's own language, human language, into a specific set of blockchain executable instructions. This ensures homogeneity. Of course, you might have heard the term bytecode or opcodes. Opcodes and bytecode are interchangeable terms. They're two sides of the same coin, so they're usually referred to the same. So let's say an example of that, maintaining transparency through this flattening step. So this is what actually takes place. This is a very simple example of a smart contract. We call this the dumb contract, me and my colleagues. It is, of course, a perfectly valid smart contract on top of a blockchain. It is an automated script running on top of a blockchain address, and let's say the Ethereum network, because this is built for Ethereum. Whenever someone sends it money, sends it Ethereum, sends it any cryptocurrency, it records the transaction. It transmits a message back to the sender that says, "Thank you, I'll remember your transaction forever," and then just keeps the money. Simple enough, but perfectly valid. This is human readable, and this is the human readable form. Of course, this needs to be translated into the machine readable bytecode that the blockchain understands. And this gets translated in this long string of hexadecimal characters that you see here, or of course the equivalent opcodes, which are the line by line instructions down there. So any combination of human language will get translated into a specific set of instructions. It's just simple. Just shorter or longer, depending on the logic of the actual human smart contract. So this ensures flattening. So after translating this, and after we have a smart contract into blockchain language, as we can refer to it, we actually need to deploy it on top of the blockchain. So smart contracts operate out of an address, as is anyone on the blockchain. A human is an address, and the smart contract is also an address. So when we deploy the smart contract on the blockchain, we assign it an address. Now, we load up a new blockchain transaction with our smart contract code. This is the process of deployment. We load up the code of the smart contract into a transaction, which is called the deployment transaction. We pay its deployment gas cost, and we send it away, off it goes. Our smart contract now lives, after deployment, autonomously on the blockchain, and is of course publicly available for anyone to use, absolutely anyone. Would they want to do it, however? Well, in the case of public blockchains, most people are afraid that their smart contracts, after being deployed, are going to be public. Well, a contract, a smart contract, is written to help with a specific deal between people. You have a specific deal between people in mind. It is written for them. It is supposed to be written to be useful to you and the guy that you're transacting with. Yes, your smart contract is public. It is accessible by anyone else on the network. But would anyone else want to use it, really? So, in our opinion, not very prudent to be afraid of publicity, publicness, I guess, of your smart contract after you deploy it. Now, the virtual machine, as we said, is where a smart contract is actually executed. And of course, we will skip through that also because we're getting deeper and deeper into computer science territory. Simply put, the virtual machine is where a smart contract code is executed. It is embedded. The virtual machine is embedded on every single node running on the blockchain, every individual computer participating in the blockchain's network. And of course, let's take Ethereum as an example. In Ethereum, every node, every computer run on the network runs its own copy of the Ethereum virtual machine. This is called an EVM instance, an instance of the Ethereum virtual machine. It is completely sandboxed and isolated from the rest of the node, and smart contracts get executed on each individual EVM instance. And when execution results match between nodes, as we said, a smart contract's execution can be considered valid and done. The Ethereum virtual machine is essential to the Ethereum protocol because it allows for anyone to execute code on a trustless ecosystem, a system that does not need trust, in which the outcome of an execution can be guaranteed by many and is, of course, as we said earlier, deterministic. So the same procedures will always produce the same results, which is a very big thing in computational systems. No fuzziness of logic. And when talking about smart contracts and virtual machines, let's talk a bit terminology here. The terms virtual machine stack or the term state or memory or storage, they get thrown around a lot. To address these terms, the virtual machine stack is something very technical. It refers to the internal architecture of how it stores data. On a simple stack, it's always new instances of data stored on top of each other. And again, very technical. First thing, last in, first out is the execution order. And also the virtual machine needs some sort of temporary memory when executing a smart contract. You need to store some local variables to return some values, to do some calculations. You need memory. This memory is considered volatile because at the end of the execution of a smart contract, the memory gets wiped. And this is what we refer to by saying virtual machine memory, the individual memory for each smart contract. And of course, a smart contract will always be, I say always, probably always, be designed to also require some sort of persistent storage. In addition, of course, to temporary memory. This is also referred to as the contract requiring to store state or storing state or being stateful. Of course, you wouldn't want to forget that someone has paid you in a smart contract in the future. Every time you run it, you don't want to have amnesia, and the smart contract, you don't want it to forget everything every time. So this is why the virtual machine, for this reason, the virtual machine maintains a small bit of persistent storage for each individual smart contract. This storage is where you keep the persistent data, and a piece of storage is generated for every contract. However, different smart contracts on the same virtual machine are not allowed to access and read each other's storage. This is usually referred to as the virtual machine storage or the state that it is in. And is individually a contract state or a contract storage refers to that individual little bit of storage just for the smart contract. And this is about the terminology here. And we'll finish with the terms. Turing completeness is also a term that you usually see thrown around a lot when talking about smart contracts and blockchains and individual advantages of a blockchain, between blockchains, I'm sorry. It does stem from the mathematics-heavy field of computability theory, the theory of computability. It is a term frequently encountered when researching smart contract development languages. Without getting too technical, Turing completeness or Turing equivalence of a smart contract language, or a virtual machine itself, because it runs that language, is used to denote that it is powerful enough and complex enough to represent every computational problem that is conceivable in it. So in short, the language's rules and semantics are strong enough to allow the developer to automate and programmatically convey any sort of computational program in the form of a smart contract. And thus, the programmer is granted enough creative freedom to represent a plethora of real-world scenarios in his contracts. I say that this term is a bit useless because most traditional programming languages are Turing complete. Fun fact, Microsoft PowerPoint is also Turing complete, in theory. So in the past decades, how many problems were able to be solved through computers? This is the very general case. How many of them were able to be solved through computers? A plethora, let's say. So judging a blockchain or a smart contract, or a smart contract language based just on Turing completeness is, I think it's a very markety way to see things, not realistic. Now, after, of course, writing a smart contract, it is important, as we said earlier, to view the source of a smart contract. A smart contract is publicly deployed and is, of course, fully transparent, at least for public blockchains. Can I read it before signing it? And, of course, before transferring assets to it or calling one of its routines? Can I read it if I have nothing to do with it or the people that were built for it and the people that use it? Can I, of course, read it just because I'm curious? Sure, and that's the truth of it. You can. It's just a matter of reversing the process of deployment. Instead of going, as we said, from human readable language to machine language, you do the opposite. You take the public machine language and then you reverse engineer it back into human readable code. Is that useful? Not at all. As we said, the flattening step that the smart contract undergoes when translated into machine code strips it from the human elements of the language, like function names or variable names, things that help a human understand what's going on. So making this reverse engineering, it strips everything from it, making it very sterilized. This way is very sterilized. For example, the name of a function withdraw funds, which certainly has a value for a human. He understands something is going to happen relating to withdrawing funds. Through this reverse engineering step, it becomes func. So it strips it from the human elements. So in practical terms, how do you read the smart contract's internal code if it's not really useful to reverse engineer it? Well, in order to view the smart contract source, its internal rules, you need to get in touch with the guy that wrote it. There should be no problem with that, of course, because the smart contract already has its inner workings publicized on the blockchain. So it was certainly built with the intent of being shared between parties in mind. Indeed, organizations and developers utilizing smart contracts usually publicize the smart contract source code at the same time that they deploy it on GitHub, on other repos, and everywhere. At the same time they deploy it. Then it's just a matter of confirming that you are reading the same contract as the one that is actually deployed on the blockchain. And to do that, you just compile the source code yourself. You make it into bytecode. You see if it's the same bytecode on the blockchain. That's about it. That you are ensuring that you're actually reading the same thing. As is the case with traditional smart contracts, you should always read something before you sign it. That's the whole point of reading a smart contract source code. Can this be considered a security risk though? Well, storage contents of a smart contract cannot be modified by anyone else but the smart contract. But the rules of a smart contract, how it regulates a procedure or the data inside the smart contract storage is fully visible at all times. Is this a problem? Well, why would it be a problem if the smart contract is geared towards being used by public actors in the first place? Think of it this way. If a smart contract was developed to be useful for a specific procedure, anyone else trying to use it would just be wasting their own time and money. Of course, this does open us up to the possibility of attack, someone actually trying to take advantage of our smart contract if it was written, of mistakes in the code or security holes. Attacks will be further discussed during the C3 class that we're not going to be presenting today, but we do take that into account. So talking about addresses again, an address on a blockchain and a smart contract is the basic representation of a user, of an actor, an autonomous agent on the blockchain. Of course, if you were a user on the Ethereum blockchain, this could be you, or this could be a smart contract equally, this long string of digits, of hexadecimal characters. Of course, there is a difference between a smart contract address and the human address, not in the format, but in how it returns a specific function. You can see on a blockchain if an address is a smart contract address. Signatures now are used in the same way that you already know in blockchains. In the context of smart contracts, signed transactions can usually be used and are usually used for access control. A specific contract function may need, for example, to be executed only by a specific user, an exact signature, for example, only the creator. This can be achieved by hard coding, writing in a clause on the smart contract, which explicitly refers to an address in the smart contract internal code. For example, a contract might only allow itself to be destroyed, to be suicided, if and only if the original deployer asks it to kill itself. For example, a smart contract facilitating a loan, a bank loan, a traditional loan, might require the release collateral function to be called only by the address that is specified as the banker. So signatures in smart contracts, apart from the usual blockchain usability, they're usually used for access control. Now, cryptographic proof of a smart contract transaction is another term usually written and seen when talking about smart contracts, is the undeniable and accurate proof that a smart contract did something on the blockchain, left a trail of something being done. It is used in the same way as normal cryptographic proof of transactions between users on blockchains, because smart contracts, although autonomous, they act on the same data and on the same ways, on the same pathways that human users do on the blockchain. There's no difference in how they act. They're just autonomous and they're just automated. A smart contract transaction that is confirmed on the blockchain contains future resistant details about what it did, how it did it, when it did it, and what rules it followed to reach that decision. So, and of course, what its internal state looked like at the time of execution. So this leaves absolute, undeniable historical proof of how and why a transaction took place. Of course, very important. Looking up a contract transaction hash, as we say, the hash of a transaction, if we look it up on the chain, will yield all of the above, and will always yield all of the above. Now, it will yield it now, and we say computationally forever. It will return those same results for as long as the network is alive, computationally forever. Credentials and claims are a very outdated term that I will not be presenting right now. And in smart contracts, the concept of arbitrators comes into place. They are used as actors that help clear stalemates in smart contract procedures, people that you call to clear stalemates. In contracts that may require mutual agreement, mutual signatures for a procedure to go through, something that you need multiple people to agree on. Declaring an arbitrator ahead of time is a useful tool for coding in a failsafe in case the two parties do not agree and have reached a stalemate. In this sense, an arbitrator is a third party to the deal, a third party trusted with some of the contents and some of the history of performance of a smart contract, and trusted by the contracted parties to resolve disputes arising from that smart contract execution, but in a fair way. They are people that are trusted by the smart contract. An arbitrator can be a human arbitrator, can be another smart contract, anything you want. An arbitrator address are usually explicitly, of course, declared and coded in from the initial stages of smart contract deployment and creation. However, this is open for development, for developer interpretation. And after all, who said the arbitrator needs to be a single entity? You can assign them as many as you want. Now, some good practices, considering that, some good practices when talking about smart contracts and developing smart contracts is that a smart contract should not be treated like a traditional computer program. And this is a very important thing to understand, that a mental shift is required when transitioning from using classical computer systems to peer-to-peer systems. And then, even more so, when we are going from traditional computer systems to novel peer-to-peer systems that are blockchains and smart contracts. So generally, the same principles of traditional distributed systems apply, which means that a classical education, computer science, is very useful in this concept. But of course, with an extra addition of a few more good practices that have to do with security of novel peer-to-peer systems, because blockchains and smart contracts acting on top of blockchains are open distributed systems and will always be open to attackers. So some extra things to consider, they are not traditional programs. For example, in smart contracts, in scripts, in smart contracts, you should avoid number crunching, which might come as a surprise to you because computer programs are traditionally very good at number crunching. Well, calculation operations on a smart contract need to be paid for, and things can get expensive very fast because the more you compute, the more you pay. But you need to ask yourself that, do you need to calculate stuff on the blockchain? Why not use a supporting system after the smart contract takes care of the transaction? How about using a traditional system to just calculate it off the chain? If you keep it on the chain, you pay more. Also, you need to avoid modifying a contract stage, a contract storage, as much as you can help it. In traditional computing, this is of course the opposite because storage is cheap, it's very cheap. Well, in smart contracts, it is the opposite. Editing storage is the most expensive thing there is. So, proper contract design can ensure the minimization of record modification and will ensure the minimization of cost. So, the mentality of measure twice, cut once is 2 times as important in smart contracts. And of course, the final thing is to avoid storing user claims or user data, you might think of it, in ways that might be unsafe in the future. Remember that transactions on a blockchain, even smart contract transactions, they keep permanent records, and the records are kept forever. And lack of forethought can come back to haunt you in the sense that if you store something that you might not want to store in the future, you can do nothing about it. You cannot erase something that has taken place on a smart contract or on the blockchain for that matter. Which brings us to the final slide of this presentation, that can smart contracts be considered a panacea? Well, smart contracts are specialized tools. They are designed and built with a specific purpose in mind. They are built to regulate and automate transactions. They are smart contracts acting on top of transaction system on a blockchain. To that end, as we say, smart contracts have very specific uses and can deliver the most added value under discretely specified, under specifically specified scenarios. Smart contracts cannot do everything, but what they can do, they do so fantastically well, as an old colleague of mine used to say. Well, maximum added value can usually be derived through what we call synpraxes, the interoperability of smart contracts with other traditional computer systems to support those. We urge you to avoid blockchain everything mentalities. Smart contracts are not built for everything. To offer an example on the last phrase before we finish this presentation, a library of books that is stored on the blockchain is probably a very silly idea, a very bad idea, because of the data stored on top of it, and there's not really any gain to be won over storing a library of books on the blockchain on a smart contract. But think of it. Think of a traditional digital database of books, storing a library of books in a traditional database, and then combine this with a smart contract system that handles the copyrights, the renting, or the sales of these books, of this library of books. So this might be a better idea. A synpraxis might be a better idea instead of the blockchain everything mentality. Of course, we will find sources and references to everything we've claimed in this presentation. This is the media attributions. This is the end. I still urge you to hold your questions off until the end. We will just now continue to the other part of the presentation. So give me 2 minutes. I'll close this off. And yeah, give me 2 minutes to open the other presentation, the introduction to Ethereum smart contracts. And this is it. I will now start sharing again, and this should be it. Let me full screen this. There we go. And opening my speaker notes. All right. So after all the boring definitions of smart contracts and what they actually are, what they actually do, how you should actually treat them, let's move on to something more exciting, which is an actual introduction to Ethereum smart contracts as they are used right now in the industry, or at least part of the industry. This class is just short. I will not keep you very long. This class aims to explain the reasons behind the prevalence of Ethereum in the smart contract market, why it happened. Of course, it will explain the concepts of gas, but both in the context of Ethereum and more of as a general principle on other blockchains or other smart contract systems. And of course, provide students with a working example of a smart contract. We're actually going to see and analyze a smart contract, a live smart contract, along with a step-by-step description of what is actually going on during the execution of the contract. Well, Ethereum is the most prevalent blockchain development platform right now for smart contracts. 2/3 of smart contracts, they get prototyped on Ethereum. And they can either be designed for private or for public blockchain use, but they are prototyped on Ethereum before anything else. It is one of the most active and buzzing platforms and has 4 times more developers than any other protocol in the network, including full-time main branch developers, not just amateurs or part-time developers. Why would you consider this important? Well, for one, there is lots of core development and, of course, general protocol activity. This is the screenshot of the Ethereum's GitHub and its activity of how many authors have actually done something on it. There's a ton of communication channels for the developers to ask for help. There's lots of core development actually going on. The protocol is moving forward, it's advancing itself, it's fixing bugs in the code. Apart from the communication channels, the Discords, the Stack Exchange that is also very active. It's a place for developers to work on their ideas. And of course, there's lots of tools for development that are offered on the Ethereum network. IDEs, frameworks, or libraries to be used. So a developer can more easily begin actually developing on Ethereum. So network activity is indeed very important. Another thing about Ethereum's prevalence is that the language of Ethereum, Solidity, feels very familiar from a developer's perspective, from a programmer's perspective. It has roots in C++ and Java. So programming in it comes naturally or intuitively. Finally, it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. When everyone is developing on Ethereum, and Ethereum is getting the most attention, and of course it's getting now the most extra growth because people are looking at it and working on it. And this constant spotlight means that everyone keeps coming to Ethereum. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. While there's a lot of different smart contract creation platforms and blockchains for smart contracts, there's a myriad of them, development principles more or less remain the same on all of the networks. So for the purposes of simplicity and posterity of these lessons, we will be focusing on Ethereum in these classes mostly. Well, a few words about proof of work and the shift towards proof of stake, especially on Ethereum. Proof of work and proof of stake are, of course, referring to the blockchain's consensus mechanism of how the blockchain reaches consensus. How network actors agree with one another and all together on the validity of a blockchain transaction. Bitcoin is, of course, famously proof of work, that you need to solve a really hard puzzle to confirm a transaction, to confirm a new block. Anyone faking this really hard puzzle needs to keep solving the puzzle faster than everyone else in the network combined. So it's pretty resistant to attacks, but the mining process is famously hard. And so is Ethereum. Ethereum is also proof of work. Lots of networks have shifted towards proof of stake, which is a less computationally heavy consensus mechanism, where you have multiple actors on the network that vote on the validity of the network of a new transaction. The idea behind proof of stake is that the more assets that you hold on this specific blockchain, the heavier your vote is, because you only stand to gain from the network's ongoing safety and health and lack of fraud. That if you start faking transactions and you have a large amount of assets on the blockchain, that you're only shooting yourself in the foot. Of course, Ethereum is still proof of work, trying to shift towards proof of stake for some years now. So what does proof of work and proof of stake have to do with your smart contracts execution on Ethereum? Well, proof of stake protocols, because they are much simpler in how they handle transactions through the voting system that we described, they tend to be faster than proof of work ones, which means blocks on the blockchain get produced faster and faster. This means that there's more transactions per second on a blockchain, because a block is, of course, just a bunch of transactions. And this also means that your smart contract can be considered to execute faster. Don't forget that your smart contract works the same as anyone else. The smart contract execution results itself is receiving and sending a transaction. So you always work through transaction. The faster the network is at producing new transactions, the faster is your smart contract. The average Bitcoin new block time is, of course, 10 minutes, something like that, 9.2, I think, right now. And the average Ethereum new block time is 13.5 seconds. It's now it's reaching 12. So the difference is huge. So it does sound great. Why would I ever want to write a smart contract on a proof of work blockchain? Well, it is a pretty big topic that we're not going to be discussing and addressing here. It's as big of a topic as discussing diesel versus gasoline engines. They are pretty correct protocols, and they do something else entirely. They both have their pros and cons. But of course, Ethereum plans to ditch proof of work and shift to proof of stake sometime in the future. It was planned for January 2020. Of course, this didn't happen. It was not due to Corona. But this shift to a new protocol, to a completely new protocol, what does it mean for your smart contract now, but in the future as well? Well, it probably means a period of volatility as the network advances and migrates over to a new way of accepting transactions. The one thing is certain: for your smart contract system, it will be a period of volatility. So the concept of gas, of ether and gas, of course, the connection between the two, is when talking about transactions or normal transactions on the network or smart contract transactions on the network, you're going to hear the term gas a lot. You're going to hear that the gas cost of this transaction is too high, or that the Ethereum network has too high gas costs, or that the gas limit of what's the gas limit of this transaction. And if you want to get your transaction into the blockchain faster, just pay more gas. Or this blockchain has a large gas cost for deploying a smart contract. Maybe you should work with something else. Well, what is gas that everyone keeps talking about? Gas is Ether, in Ethereum's case, at least. It is a minuscule amount of a blockchain's main asset, a minuscule amount of Ether, very small, built in every transaction. It is built in as the minimum payment to submit something to the blockchain, the minimum, something minimal that you need to pay for every transaction that gets up on the blockchain. It's the transaction fee, in short. But why is what we need to be asking ourselves. Why though? And why do smart contracts need gas to run? Why do they need this small transaction fee to run? Well, think of gas as what you need to pay to the network for the network to compute and your stuff and to record your stuff forever on the blockchain. It is also to stop people from mindlessly flooding the network with tons of aimless transactions, maliciously or otherwise accidentally. Because if a transaction costs something, however small, however minuscule, spamming usually brings up a lot of money. It needs a lot of money to run. So gas and the concept of gas is an integral part of every blockchain network and every blockchain transaction, true. With the specification that simple transactions cost less gas. For example, a simple payment between wallets costs minuscule amounts of gas, and more complex transactions cost more gas. So smart contract transactions usually execute their internal code. So the more complex that internal code is, very colloquially, the more stuff that your smart contract does and performs, the more costly the execution is for the network, because it actually needs to compute a lot of stuff, which often requires more computational power from the network. So the network charges you for the computational cost of your smart contract and the execution results. How is gas connected to Ethereum, the actual asset? Well, what's the relation between gas and Ether? And we get this straight from the Ethereum white paper. The transaction fee, the fee of a transaction, is equal to the gas limit times the gas price. This means little as of right now. This means very little. Now, gas limit can be considered the amount of arbitrary units that the transaction requires to be processed. This is preset. This is a sum of these preset costs for every kind of operation and any kind of operation on the transaction. So for example, a simple transfer, it is preset to use up 21,000 arbitrary units of gas. So the gas limit for a simple transfer equals 21,000. You take this straight from the white paper. You don't compute that. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just a unit of complexity. So smart contract transactions that have a varying amount of operations have, for example, cost many more than a simple transfer, or maybe does something as well as a simple transfer. And the sum of these operations, the sum gas cost of these multiple operations in the smart contract, which are probably much higher than 21,000, they get summed up. And this is the gas limit of a smart contract transaction. So if a smart contract does three simple transfers, the gas limit is 63,000, just 3 times 21,000. Now, this was the definition of gas limit. How about gas price? Well, gas price is the maximum amount that you're willing to pay per gas unit. So the minimum amount of Ether that you're willing to pay per arbitrary unit of gas limit. So for your transaction to be processed in the network, the more you give, the more that you are willing to pay for these previous gas limit amounts for these units, the more that you're willing to pay, the more tasty your transaction will be for the miners to actually process. When someone talks about gas, generally on the internet, they're probably talking about gas limit, keep that in price. They're probably talking about the gas limit of the transaction, of the arbitrary units, of how complex the transaction is. To give you a better example of this, because I know it is complex, but understanding gas is integral in understanding smart contracts. I'd like you to think of a car that is making a trip. So we said earlier that the transaction fee equals gas limit times gas price. Well, how about a trip cost with your car costs the liters of gas that you're going to be expending and times the price of liter, per liter of gasoline. Well, gas limit, these arbitrary units, as we said, is the amount of fuel needed for your trip to reach your destination, to reach the end of your trip. Gas price is the price per liter of fuel for your trip. So these are directly correlated, and think of it in the context of the example. Of course, you'd want, in gas price calculation, you'd want to pay as little as you can, of course, per liter of gasoline. And if you could pay zero, that would be the best, free gas. But think of it this way: if you raise the price that you are willing to pay, more gas stations will want to fuel your car. So gas price is, of course, the total gas price, the amount that you're willing to pay is, of course, not measured in euros, like liters of gas, but it's measured in ways, kiloway, megaway, gigaway. You might have seen these terms thrown around on the internet. A way, simply, is 1/10 to the power of 18 of an ether. It is a very tiny amount of ether, 0.0000001 ether, or of course 1 quintillionth ether. So in smart contract programming, instead of always writing this silly minuscule number, we just write way, and it's used to denote 1 quintillionth of an ether. This is how small gas prices are. And these extra small denominations are intended to be helpers because gas costs are so small. So, for example, a good gas price these days is around 20 gigaway, so 20 million way. Other blockchains, of course, have different name denominations, not way. You might have heard of Satoshi in Bitcoin. It is the 1 quintillionth Bitcoin. 1 Satoshi is 1 quintillionth Bitcoin. It's every blockchain uses its own term. In the previous example of a simple transfer of Ethereum on the Ethereum blockchain, the gas limit is, as we said, preset at 21,000. This is the gas limit. And we're willing to pay 20 gigaway, which is a rather high price for the transaction, but we want it to be extra fast. So we're willing to pay 20 gigaway per gas unit, per gas limit. So the total transaction fee, how much we're actually going to pay for the transaction to go through, even in a smart contract, is going to be 21,000, which is the preset cost gas limit for a simple transfer, times 20, which makes up for 20,000 gigaway, which comes up to 0.00044 ether, which is around 10 euro cents, 12 euro cents. So this is how much we're talking about here. These are tiny amounts. Gas can be considered as the ongoing operating budget of your smart contract. You need to calculate gas cost for your smart contract deployment, first of all. When your smart contract gets deployed, you need to pay gas, and lots of it. You need to keep in mind the gas cost of functions that are being executed on a deployed contract because they use up gas. So you need to know how much gas it's also going to cost to store things, records, data in your smart contract storage. So these are all the operating costs that you need to keep in mind for your smart contract system. There's a preset gas limit amount needed for every opcode, for every operation on the blockchain, on a smart contract, I'm sorry. So you take that straight from the white paper, and the more complex a smart contract is, it means more gas costs. So the more stuff that your smart contract does, it's actually going to cost more. Things aren't that bleak, however. If you send too much gas limit, unused amounts of the gas, of course, multiplied by gas cost, they get returned back to you. So unused gas just get returned back to you. The blockchain is not wasteful. And of course, large gas sums are also returned upon contract storage when you empty it, or when you kill the contract. When you suicide the contract, you get all the gas back. So in this case, in general, in smart contracts, minimalism pays off. So you need to design your smart contract well to keep these running costs low, because every transaction needs gas. And this is real money out of your wallet. And of course, after we've talked about all this terminology, as I promised you earlier, after we've talked all about the boring stuff of the systems, let's try to get a taste of an Ethereum smart contract. Let's try to design and build a simple democratic voting smart contract. It is a smart contract that is built to facilitate a public voting process, a democratic voting process. This contract will implement a public voting process of candidates that are collecting votes. Anyone on the blockchain, of course, for example, which means it's every address on the blockchain, can vote on a candidate through a function called cast vote of the contract, which just raises the votes received by every candidate by +1. Just gives a +1 to every candidate. Anyone on the blockchain, any address on the blockchain, can also inquire, ask about the votes that a candidate has received using a function called total votes for. You just run this function, you get how many votes at that specific time a specific candidate has received. And of course, all blockchain users can freely vote. And the vote transaction, the transaction that actually sends the vote to the contract, is permanently and immutably stored on the blockchain forever as a pair of what address voted for what candidate. So the record of your vote is kept forever. Some helper functions are also created to be used from within the contract, although they can be also called externally, but it's of no use. These are also part of the smart contracts that we're going to be designing. Just a heads up, there's going to be a few helper functions to help with the whole tying down of the smart contract. To better illustrate the text that I just read, this will be the basic functionality of the smart contract. We're going to build this together, so we're the deployer. We deploy the smart contract onto the blockchain, and we give it a specific list of candidates. They're named Cand1, Cand2, and Cand3, Alice, Bob, and Charlie, whatever the names might be in that voting process. You deploy it. It no longer belongs to you. It no longer obeys to you. It becomes fully autonomous. And while it's on the blockchain, it has a specific storage space called vote storage, the storage of the votes in this specific smart contract. So when it's up and when it's live, along comes voter 1 at any time, voter 1, which has a specific address, and just runs the vote, runs the function, cast vote, candidate 1. So he runs the function of this democratic voting smart contract. He runs the function cast vote and just gives it the name candidate 1. So he votes for candidate 1. The smart contract just gives +1 to all the votes received by Cand1. Along comes, of course, voter 2, which also wants to vote. He runs cast vote, but this time he gives another name. He gives candidate 3. So he votes for candidate 3. The smart contract, of course, goes to the storage of the smart contract of itself and just gives +1 to candidate 3. And along comes another voter, voter 3. This guy doesn't want to vote. He just wants to see the results for candidate 1. So he just asks the smart contract for the total votes received for candidate 1, for Alice. So the smart contract just replies to him a certain amount of text, just 128. This is the votes I have recorded for candidate 1, and that's about it. This is the basic functionality of the smart contract that we're going to be designing. I don't want you to be scared. This is the actual code of the smart contract as it gets deployed on the latest version of Ethereum. The first line is, of course, very boring technical info for the compiler. It's just the version of Solidity that we used to write this smart contract. Of course, a contract needs a name. You declare the name of the smart contract, which is just democratic voting. And the lines 3 and 4 are just the storage. You declare the storage of the smart contract, which is just a list of candidates, because you are going to need a list of candidates that the people can vote for. And of course, just a simple storage space for all the numbers of the votes that each candidate has received. So a pair of candidate to number. Then we see the three functions that we described earlier. I'm sorry. First, we begin with the constructor of the smart contract. This is the first function that runs when you deploy the smart contract. This is how it gets initialized, how it begins its life. So it just holds a list of candidates as the deployer, as we gave it at the first deployment. And then we just see the three functions that we described earlier. First is the function that asks for the total votes received by a candidate. We named it total votes for. Just returns a simple number. Checks if the candidate that you asked about, if he's in the list. If he's not in the list, returns you 0. If he's in the list, returns you the specific number. The second function of the smart contract is actually the voting function. The function that an address, a user can execute, and you execute it, and then you give it a name. You give it a name for the candidate that you want to vote for. The smart contract just checks if the name that you gave it is a valid candidate that the smart contract already had in its list, and if yes, it just gives +1 to the candidate. And of course, the third function is the helper function. As we said earlier, there is going to be some helper functions. It just checks the smart contract itself internally, checks if a candidate is valid, which means that checks if the name that you give it exists in the list of candidates that the smart contract was deployed with. This is, of course, a live smart contract. You can take the code right away, copy paste it, and it will work out of the box. And it will implement this whole process of users calling vote for candidate or calling total votes for, and voting for a preset amount of candidates and just counting votes and going +1, +1, +1 until the results are reached. Some afterthoughts on this smart contract that we saw earlier. You have to admit that it is a very elegant thing to be able to implement a democratic voting procedure on just 30 lines of code, and this process will, in just 30 lines of code, will keep permanent records of this whole process in a very transparent and permanent way. Well, you saw earlier, though, that in the code, our last smart contract did not make any use of blockchain assets. You did not see any coins. You did not see any recording of coins. You did not see any receiving of assets of coins, or didn't create any coins, didn't transfer any coins out. You didn't see any democratic coin being used around or thrown around. Well, indeed, you should design a smart contract, because you design it yourself. You should design a smart contract to selectively take advantage of any number of blockchain features. Yes, coins are a blockchain feature, but our democratic voting contract did not make any use of assets. It did not need to use any assets. So, but of course, it took full advantage of the transparency offered by the blockchain. It took full advantage of the immutability of transactions offered by the blockchain, and of course, the public nature of the whole smart contract and blockchain thing. So it took advantage of that, of the general accessibility of the Ethereum blockchain. It did not need to use coins or assets or transfers of assets, so it did not use that feature. So we made a voting dApp, a decentralized app, a voting dApp, that is owned by no single user and is indeed very resistant to fraud, because it does not accept fraudulent transactions. You should only design a smart contract to do what you needed to do. You do not absolutely need to use every single feature of a blockchain. You just need to use those that are useful to you. Of course, a blockchain is a tool, and you use the specific tools for the specific job. Also keep in mind that the functions of a smart contract are always public and are always callable by anyone. So we either need to code in access control or with signatures, as we said earlier, or design your smart contract in a way that invoking a function, running a function of a smart contract, only holds value for the people that you intend to use the contract. Otherwise, people are going to feel that your smart contract is useless. For example, as I say in the notes, why would someone want to use our voting contract, our democratic voting smart contract, if he didn't know the candidates? For example, why would I, living in Kavala, use a democratic voting smart contract for candidates living in Italy? You should always design your smart contract to be useful to specific people, so that others have no use on actually using it and exploiting it. In the end of this, take smart contracts for what they actually are, nothing more than automated scripts that are peer-owned, that are owned by the community. So before finishing up, they are scripts written by humans that are just automated and owned by the community. So going back, before finishing up, to this specific smart contract that we designed and presented in this presentation, it is very simplistic, again, in its logic, and for example, has some functional weaknesses on this implementation. For example, what happens when the same users, the same address, keeps voting? The voting smart contract does not take into consideration people that have voted before. It doesn't store the addresses that have voted. It could be, but for the simplicity of this example, we didn't. So this particular example is vulnerable in the sense that the same user can keep voting and it will just go +1, +1, +1, +1. So it's not really a very valid voting process. And so you design your smart contract in the same way that you would design any other system. Specific features for as much as you need the features, those features, for as long as these features are useful to you, rather, or your use case. Again, the same bibliography applies everything that we have referenced into in this presentation. So this was the end of these two modules. There's still some time to go, so there's still enough time for questions and answers. All this material will, of course, be forwarded to you, and if not already available on the DLT4ALL site. So let me shut this down. And I think I'm done with the presentation. Dimitris, if you would like to help us move on into the Q&A section.
Yes, I think Iraklis has a small part.
Sure. And thank you again, Iraklis, for finishing early enough so you didn't cut into my time. Thank you very much for this.
And after Iraklis, we can go to a brief Q&A session. Let me remind all that tomorrow we will have another session at that time, focused on practical examples and business cases. We will also have a guest speaker, Ms. Adrienne Thras, who is a seed capital and startup coach. So let's not forget that tomorrow's session would be also a practical example-oriented one. And then we will have a short panel discussion and of course, Q&A. So maybe Iraklis is now ready to conclude his presentation, and then we can have a brief Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if people can see me, if my video...
It's up and visible. Yep.
Yes, of course.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Thank you also, Dimitris Chounis, for the interesting presentation, because now I can use the term smart contracts in a much freer manner and easier manner than before. So very quickly, to continue from where I left, as I said earlier, the whole data protection notion and rationale and motivation is there to assist to ensure that the we are really applying and enforcing the regulation rather than punish the people who are breaching that. So we assume that because the regulation was relatively new, now with GDPR, things have really toughened up, and one of the reasons why GDPR really shook up the world of business is because of the large fines that it entails, up to 5% of GDP of the gross product of a company, and that is why, for example, the French the Data Protection Authority has fined some hundreds of millions Google. Also, Facebook has been fined for similar breaches and so forth. Okay, because they can have up to 5% of their gross product per year. So, in that sense, as I said earlier, it is not a criminal offense if you breach it, but rather at the moment we seek to ensure that you observe it. But nevertheless, if you breach a regulation, the subject is entitled to some compensation. We'll see later on through the subject rights, the subject rights, what are these kind of compensations. And the commissioner is there to ensure that you observe, and exactly what you need to observe is written on a notice, which if you contravene, then we have really criminal charges against you. Also, the other thing is that if the commissioner believes that you are breaching the data protection regulation, then in that case, he may ask the judge to offer them a warrant to enter their premises and be able to inspect whether you are applying exactly what you are expected to apply in terms of security and control of access to whom, who has access to data and so forth. Okay, as I said earlier, we will now go through the principles very quickly. I don't want to, I know you're tired. I don't want to keep you here for a long time. So really, the first principle is to do with the data collection. And it says that data will be processed fairly and lawfully and shall not be processed unless at least one of the following satisfied. The consent is explicit. Now, it used to be at the very beginning that it needed not to be explicit, but things have changed. And now really you have to be extremely to the point and really specify also at the same time what is the purpose. This purpose is extremely important because that really enables the subject to agree or disagree whether to participate in this data collection. In all cases, what we consider certain data to be sensitive, and this is to be racial origin, political opinions, sex life. These are really sometimes that you really have to be very careful as to how you collect and how you treat that kind of data. Okay. Now, so the data subject has consented when the data is collected. Sometimes, if you are a police officer, for example, you need to ask the person's name in order to provide them with a ticket. Or if you are a notary, then you need to ask people to make sure that you have the access to their ID to ensure that these people who claim to be a particular person is actually the person who claims to be. So in that case, you need to have access to that data, and therefore the data subject cannot withdraw consent. Okay. So the second principle is to do with that the data will only obtain for a specific lawful purpose. This is extremely important. Okay, so therefore, here we can see blockchain, where all data is attached to a specific purpose. These purposes could be viewed, and therefore, when the data subject consents, then automatically it registers through the application of a smart contract that at that point subject A consented to data being collected for these purposes and only these purposes. And therefore, you can see a further way down the road where the various processes only process things that have already been tagged and approved by the previous smart contract. Otherwise, in an automated world, these processes do not occur because this is not what the data subject has agreed to. Okay, so again, you can have an automated procedure where through a blockchain approach, we note what actually, I mean, you can imagine that there is no control, but rather we control the processes. And then retrospectively, the data subject can ask a request to see exactly what that data has been processed to. Therefore, they could receive a list of all the processes that have been applied on their data. And then the person can see whether these processes are compatible with what this person has agreed to. Okay, and there's no dispute because the blockchain application ensures that any kind of process that has taken place has been registered and has gone through the blockchain immutability and transparent mode, and therefore it is guaranteed that it actually has happened. Here we have a small case to do with British Gas in UK, where the customers, where British Gas bought another company, and the company that was a financial company. Therefore, British Gas thought that because now they own that company, they could flood them with material, marketing material, nothing to do with financial products as they have agreed to, but rather with products of regarding gas appliances and gas products in general. They objected and they won. Okay, so this is just really a small example of how these things have happened. The third principle has to do with the amount of data. As you may know, every time you try to register for an event or something, sometimes they ask everything that they can think of. And to make matters worse, they make it sometimes compulsory. So you really, if you really want to access that web page or that service, then you really have to provide all the information which are really not necessary and not relevant and not related to the purpose for which you want to perform a transaction. So for example, if you go to any e-commerce site, some of them, they force you to submit your AFIMI, the inland revenue number, the inland revenue ID. Okay, which is really nothing to do unless you want an invoice and not a simple receipt. This is excessive information. And this is exactly what this principle is about, that you should not try for excessive information. The most notable case is that of Alitalia. It happens in Athens, in Eleftherios Venizelos Airport, where Alitalia, after the 2001 event, 9/11, all the airlines were concerned that the people who actually checked in and the people who actually boarded may not be the same, and there may be some terrorists who carry some bombs or etc., etc., etc. And therefore, they wanted to face control every single and make sure that the person who actually checked in is the person who boards the plane, and they used biometrics in order to do that. The Greek Data Protection Authority objected strongly to this. They said that the law has certain ways of identifying a person, and that is a passport, and therefore you cannot substitute these means by biometrics, but rather you must follow the law and use the means that the state provides as official proofs of identity. Some legal people really said that the Greek Data Protection Authority was rather over-jealous in the sense that it was really running a pilot study, a pilot case. The people who were asked whether they consented or not, and therefore only the people who actually said yes, they took part in this. That is, when they checked in, they approached the device where the iris of their eye were taken, and again, a similar device was used just before they boarded the plane. Okay, so, but they were forced to shut it down very quickly. The fourth principle is to do with the accuracy of data. This is extremely important. And really, we have a case in Greece, in Larissa, happened in 2004, where one was, as you know, the Greek banks, they have the habit of not only providing you with high interest rates, but also demanding as many guarantors as they can possibly find. And then if the person who owns the loan does not pay up, then they approach the guarantor and they ask this person to pay up. And this is exactly what happens in this case. So the person who got the loan defaulted, but then when they called upon the guarantor to pay up, the guarantor paid up, but nevertheless, both of them were blacklisted in Tiresias. So, and this was found by chance, because at some point the guarantor went to ask for a credit card to be issued, and he was refused because of the Tiresias entries. And therefore he went to the court, and he was compensated with 5,000 euros. Fifth principle is the personal data processed for any purposes shall not be kept for any longer than is necessary for these purposes. So this is the time limit, extremely important aspect of data, because data not only has a time limitation. So for example, now you earn 10,000 euros, tomorrow you earn 20,000 euros, in 5 years you earn 50,000 euros, and then you become unemployed. Therefore, in this particular case, you are being lying to the bank that you have a financial capability and a financial clout when this is not the case, or vice versa. The bank still thinks that you earn 10,000 when in fact you're earning 50,000, and therefore they provide you with no financial products because they have the wrong information. But also, as you know, even in Tiresias, there's a time limit after which the data has to be wiped out and cleaned, and therefore you are released back to the society with your record clean and not blackened. Okay, so this is the fifth principle. The sixth principle is there to ensure that the subjects have rights, which they can act upon in case things go wrong. And primarily, the right is to ask for a rectification, to ask for a notification, and to ask for a compensation. These are the three basic rights under the Data Protection Act, but which have now, we have more rights, we'll see later. Okay, and this is really, and this is also the right that guarantees that the data controller must provide the data subject with a copy of what sort of all the information that is being stored upon. The seventh principle, which has now been further modified in GDPR, is to do with appropriate technical and organizational measures. Now, all public bodies must have what is known as the Data Protection Officer, the DPO. All the private companies who are above SME, that is, they have more than 250 employees, they must have a DPO, and this person is charged with the technical organizational measures. As you can see here, this was left loose, that the data controller must have. No, it's not. Now it is not long. It's no longer that the data controller must have. It is the data controller must nominate, if it's a civil organization, a civil service, a public body, or if it is a large corporation, they must nominate a person, and that person is responsible. Therefore, if things go wrong, we know who to point the finger at. And that's why I said, no, the GDPR is really building upon the experience and expanding and rectifying and smoothing out some things which are not very clear and not so sure, closing loopholes and closing people areas where people could dither whether it's this or that or the other. Okay. The eighth principle is the outside the EU. EU is quite strong about this, although EU has shot itself on the foot after the 9/11, because it is the EU who were forced to back down by America. When I say by America, I mean by the airlines, who, as you all know, when you travel to America, all your data is being transferred to American security agencies, which they study your profiles and your data before, and therefore they have the ability to say that you are not allowed to go into America. The latest controversial, I want to say the most famous controversial issue was Cat Stevens. Cat Stevens is a Greek Cypriot guy who converted to Islam. He's now called Yusuf Islam, I think, if I remember well. And he's a Cypriot who was raised in UK. He boarded the plane, and halfway over the Atlantic, the Americans realized that he was part of the plane, and they forced the plane to come back to UK, disembark him, and then go back. Although they are interested about territorial, nevertheless, they done that. And they done that because the airlines, otherwise, they will not be allowed to fly to America. So, but also, then all the utility companies who now have data centers, customer services in India, for example, they also are allowed to have that, and the EU has come out with a concoction of what is called a safe harbor, where the company declares that building to be an EU land, and therefore it observes all the EU regulations, which of course is rubbish, if you ask me, because if something goes wrong and there's a breach of data, then that, according to the legislation, that breach has to be tried in India, because it is done by an Indian company. Therefore, you cannot drag them to UK or to Germany or to France or to Greece or wherever. There's a fundamental problem, because the judge cannot try them, because there is no such legislation in India. And they cannot borrow an EU legislation to try them for breach of data. So the whole thing is a shambles, but nevertheless. So the rights of the subject is that they need to know, they have the right to know what data has been held about them, for what purposes, and also they always had the ability to have exclusion when it comes to automated means. That is, when a software automatically, based on certain criteria, decides something, and this decision is sometimes a black box, then, so for example, one criteria that we know and has been very controversial is that if an address in UK was found to be lived upon in the past by somebody who defaulted a loan, then that automatically increases the negative arithmetic of somebody's credit rating who lives in that address, although that person is not really has ever defaulted anything, or has no connection. The rationale is purely statistical, as with all analytics, based on that this person belongs to a particular income. If they live in that area, then they fall into that income range, and therefore is likelihood, it is quite likely that they will follow the same pattern as the person who lived that. I know it's very controversial, but there you are, and therefore you always have the means to ask for an exclusion when it comes to automated means. You have the right under data protection directive to prevent processing because you think it may harm you. But now, as we'll see later on, you have the right to, even worse, to be forgotten, to erase data. And we'll see how this is problematic. Now, here is very quickly the procedure that you follow. If you want to have access, you write to them. Then they eventually will reply to you. They will want to identify you uniquely in case there's a lot of similar names, or, you know, like John Smith's, etc. So they want to know exactly who it is, and then eventually, if they find you, they will come back. Now, imagine that this whole procedure is centrally controlled by the Data Protection Authority, and through a blockchain, person uniquely identifies oneself, makes an application. That application is logged, and therefore the company cannot say, "Oh, this email never arrived. We never received it. We don't know." Or this is again the DPO where it comes into. The DPO is responsible for ensuring and answering on time all these aspects. Okay, so again, then through the blockchain, we know that this has been acted upon, that it's been received, it's been opened, it's been processed, and we know that then they have the 30 days to respond it back to you, and then again, they cannot put it back into the wrong address, or they cannot send it to the wrong email, etc., etc. Also, therefore, a blockchain application here helps do this fast, efficiently, and with no questions of the process and whether this is happening according to the procedures. Okay, so here we have the controversial provision of GDPR, where really GDPR has made the provision, the right to be forgotten. The rationale was very noble. You know, we all are crazy and we do crazy things from time to time. So we post a naked picture of ourselves. So we have a naked video of ourselves, which then goes around the internet, and you know, stays for there, etc., etc., etc. And then at some point, we want to press a button, restart and reset, and we want to forget our past, and we want to have a new life. So that was a rationale, and that has created huge headaches. Data centers have a huge problem because they cannot know how many times this is now saved in their backups. This is really a huge problem for them. Therefore, now they really need to have a kind of indexing in order to be able to know where things are, etc., etc. Nevertheless, this noble thing has a problem with blockchain, because the blockchain, as you know, has two, as Dimitris also said, has two properties, transparency and immutability. So here we asking a blockchain application to suddenly forget some data. This is a huge problem. There are no easy solutions. There's a lot of research happening. A lot of companies that were actually startups in the area of blockchain have given up completely because of the implications that GDPR forced upon them, and therefore they thought that, you know, the fines that they would receive, because if the GDPR was actually enforced upon them, and also there was a controversy that sometimes people who you know, collect this data, even though they're not the actual data controllers as such, but they may need to register as data controllers. So really, it's something that has not been resolved as an issue, whether anybody who runs blockchain application must have data protection, data controller status, and therefore needs to observe the GDPR. But really, the point is with the data to be erased. Is no longer to be rectified, because rectification can easily happen. You just disable that particular block, but that block now points to another block which is rectified, and it shows that it is rectified of the previous one. Therefore, the integrity of the data is not really lost. It is there. It is when you are really asked to one block to disappear in the thin air. There has been some solutions, very clumsy. We don't know whether they will be able to withstand the rigorousness and the demand of a blockchain development cycle. It's only done on research, but nevertheless, it is something that you know, within EU, it has caused a lot of problems, especially when it came to health records, because this is something that really is quite controversial. Sometimes we want people to know, to be able to trace them if they have some contagious disease. But then at the same time, this contagious disease sometimes is a stigma, and therefore this person may want, so for example, AIDS these days can be suppressed to such an extent that it's not traceable and is not transferred to other people. Therefore, according to the spirit of GDPR, this person should have the right to ask all the health authorities to wipe out all their records of him being treated as an HIV positive patient in the past and receiving any kind of medication that hints or points to the existence of AIDS disease. This is extremely controversial. The states try to resolve this, sometimes in a very clumsy manner. So, for example, UK tried to exclude all health records, and the Commission went mad. And actually, the Information Commission officer in UK also went mad, because that really gives rise to other extreme potential atrocities that may happen with manhandling of data, because if GDPR doesn't apply, that means that the hospital or the health authority in UK is not legally obliged to ensure that there is full and extremely tight electronic security control on the data, and that they will not be responsible if there's a breach from inside or there's a breach from outside because they have been neglected. As for example, they have been the case with British Airways. British Airways were found £180,000 a few months back because they had a very loose security on their web page, which enabled the hackers to hack into their web page and enter their system and remove sensitive data as well as credit card numbers and other data of customers of British Airways. British Airways is now complaining and huffing and puffing, but nevertheless, this is a demonstration what GDPR is also trying to achieve. Yeah. So Germany was even worse because it tried to exclude all civil service from GDPR regulation. So they wanted all the state, who is actually the worst offender, is a civil service, to not to be governed by GDPR, but rather to be immune. Okay. So this concludes the data protection and blockchain applications, and how the blockchain could, potentially provide some solutions to certain stipulations that GDPR observes, and therefore it is not any longer the goodwill, and the trust of that you trust the company that they will perform, but rather now it really is no longer that, but rather it is ensured, it is guaranteed that this is happening what they say. Okay, and of course, at the same time, although I think we'll touch upon this tomorrow, we can turn this whole thing around and we can see how blockchain could help the digital economy of the future by ensuring that data is used and solved through blockchain applications where really the data subject also has a much fairer share of the income that is generated because of the use of the data by the various users. Okay, so now very quickly I will go to intellectual property rights, where I have a few slides very quickly. So yes, so how do we ensure that the data is used? Who uses the data? How exactly data is being processed and used? All this can be done by blockchain software solutions, and we consider this a cornerstone. Now, intellectual property itself governs both tangible and intangible goods. When it comes to, it has a number of instruments to tackle the tangible and intangible. When it comes to how the intellectual property mechanism operates, we need to think of these two basic concepts: the concept of the idea and the expression of the idea, i.e., the concretization of that idea. So when it comes to the idea itself, it is the patent that primarily governs and regulates and protects that idea from anybody copying it, and therefore it allows the patent owner to release licenses and sell that idea to other people. But when it comes to intangible goods, that is the expression of the idea, the concretization of the idea, that is software, books, movies, and theaters, then it is the copyright that is really the instrument that we use. Now there is very quickly to tell you that there is the copyright that we apply when it comes to software. It is the Anglo-Saxon notion of the copyright, which is free and is given automatically upon the creation of the work. So if you write on a piece of paper, "I'm stupid," then you have copyright on that. Even though, and copyright is not exclusive, i.e., as long as you write this on your own and you have not cheated from somebody else's copyrighted ideas, then, and if you all write, therefore, if you all write on a piece of paper, "I'm stupid, I'm stupid, I'm stupid," and you wrote it on your own, then you all have copyright. Copyright is not an exclusive owner. It can be, you can have copyright for similar works as long as they have not cheated on each other. Okay, so this is extremely important to know. Now, also, the expression of, now between the idea and the expression of the idea when it comes to intangible stuff, that is software, let's say in our case, then sometimes you have a stage where you go and you sell your ideas to venture capitalists, to angel investors, and so forth. And therefore, there you run the risk that at some point this person or this group will tell you your idea is rubbish. And then when you go out very disappointed, from the other door, here comes a team of developers, and the guy says, "Look, here's a brilliant idea, go and develop this." In order to avoid this situation, which at the moment you do through an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, there is also in UK the law of confidence, which oversees such an operation. And therefore, if you convey some information in confidence, then that information is protected. And therefore, if this person tells about this information, then he's liable to be sued for criminal damages, and you can claim compensation out of this person. Now, to come back and really distinguish between the Anglo-Saxon and the continental view of what is a copyright, in continental Europe, primarily the German and French courts and the French justice of systems, for the copyright, they have to substantiate. You have to prove that this is worthy. It has all the characteristics of innovation. It brings something new and so forth. And then all these claims to be investigated and to be verified by the Copyright Office or the Patents Office that exists. This will take a few years because there's a backlog, and therefore, in terms of software, at that point, it's too late. Because other competitors who use the Anglo-Saxon system, they will have released their software into the market. And therefore, for this reason, the European Union has adopted that we will apply, when it comes to software, the Anglo-Saxon system. And this is extremely important to understand the difference when it comes. In one case, you automatically are given this, and if there is a dispute, then you go to the court and you decide who cheated on whom. Now, automatically is given to the authors. Therefore, you have to pay attention to freelancers, because the freelancer is also the author of the software. Therefore, unless in a contract with the freelancer, you say that I pay you X amount of money to develop the software, and upon delivery, the copyright is mine, then the copyright will remain with the freelancer. And as in the case of Yamaha music instruments in Greece, they pay twice for the same software, okay, because they forgot to have this extra clause in the contract. Now, where blockchain can come in and help us with IPR is sometimes the authors or these people who develop software don't want to actually market and sell their products. So they provide them, they give them to third parties, being that software houses or be that publishers, who then they take an exclusive license from them and then they sell to the public. Therefore, this is great because they are, all the energy of these software developers now go back in developing other ideas, other pieces of software, but they have no control over their financial activities. So, for example, if the publisher will tell them, I sold one of 1,000, they have no ways of checking. They have to ask to investigate the books, the account books, which is not a very easy thing to do. Whether they sold it for $10 or $20 or $100, or whether the agreed price is, let's say, is $100, but they say we have to give him a discount, have to give this customer a discount of $30. Whether this is true or not, again, they have no ways of checking. They don't know whether the product is being promoted, and the software is being promoted well and really with zest. Therefore, a blockchain application could oversee this whole operation, and therefore this will create a very transparent way where everything will appear, where they gave discount, exactly how much they sold, how much they owe to the software developer, and so forth. Okay. Also, another area is digital rights management. Tomorrow we'll talk about some cases, but something that occurred to me the other day when I was looking at ERT. As you know, the Greek Broadcasting Corporation has created ERTflix, the equivalent of Netflix, and they make a distinction between productions where they own the IPR and productions where they don't own the IPR. For those that don't own the IPR, they have them up in the ERTflix, but they have them for a specific time. And after that, that particular program is no longer available. What if a blockchain solution was there where the IPR owner allowed ERTflix to have this application, to have this program for the free for the period that they, the copyright that Ed paid, the fee that they paid for the copyright in order to transmit it to be applied. And after that, then the blockchain takes you, that is me, the viewer, the customer. I pay a small fee and I'm able to view the particular program where everybody's happy. I am the viewer, I'm happy. The IPR is increasing the customer base, and also Earth is happy because both is making some money, and at the same time is enabling their viewers to view all the programs that have gone through Earth without really having any time frame limitations. And this is all. Thank you very much. I think we're more or less on time. So I will stop sharing this, and Dimitris can take over.
Yes, thank you, Irakli. So if there are any questions to Iraklis or Dimitris from the audience.
Dimitris, allow me, there were two questions sent to me via private chat.
Okay, good.
But unfortunately, both of those people are not here with us anymore. So I will read one, Mr. Dimitris Kolovos. If some co-worker of his is still here, please, you can send the question via email, because I see that you haven't completed your questions. It's half, it appears as half on my chat. And also, let me start the video so there's something playing. And also, there was a question by Julia Vorobcheva, which said that, can the names of the parties to a contract, to a smart contract, be seen publicly, or just the subject of the contract and the text can be seen? Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, fortunately, everything can be seen publicly on a smart contract. Who signed it, who used what, and who stored what data. Everything can be seen publicly, every single part. The thing about smart contracts is that they are pseudonymous. So it's not a name of someone, but an address. So this is sort of a naming system. So if someone knows your address, he can see that it was your address that used this specific function of a smart contract, and the record is kept forever. So if you don't want this to happen, maybe you should not invest in, you should not use rather public blockchains. There are tools that do not keep everything public, but on Ethereum or on generally public blockchains, this is fully transparent and fully readable. That was it, Dimitris. Sorry about taking over like this, but
No worries.
They were private questions.
Yes, of course. This is the point, actually. So I don't know if we have any other questions. So if Iraklis did receive some private questions, Iraklis.
I received one before, and I answered it to the person, and they were asking, how a blockchain could be used with data protection. And I said, I explained to this person, and then, but also, as I said to him, I gave some examples during the rest of the data protection where we could use a blockchain in order to ensure that certain things happen on time and in a particular order. So
yes,
that's it.
Okay, excellent. So if there are no, we're recording the session, and we are going to upload some of the session.
Dimitri, somebody is asking for YouTube link.
Yes, this is what I'm saying.
Sorry.
We are recording the session, and we're going to upload either on YouTube or in a proprietary platform. You will receive the link in any case. I'm not sure if we upload the whole thing or small parts of it, but we
yes, it will be uploaded in the DLT4ALL channel, which is in YouTube.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here's the question, the answer. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
If there are no other questions from the audience, thank you very much for being here. all the presenters, the audience. Thank you very much. And I wish you a nice evening, and we'll talk tomorrow, same hour. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everyone. See you
Thank you,
tomorrow.
everybody. Good night.
Thank you everyone
Thank
for being
you.
here. See you tomorrow.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night.